All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kyle Nelson with Jellicose. We're an AWS Advanced Tier Consulting Partner, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us today to talk about OLA, which stands for Optimization and Licensing Assessment. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here at the beginning going over who Jellicose is and how we work with our customers to use this optimization and licensing assessment as part of our overall building of a TCO and cloud strategy. And then I'm going to hand it over to David Burbank from Cloudamize, which is the tool that we use as part of this OLA program with our customers. So if we can move to the next slide. So a little bit about Jelecos. We're a technology solutions provider focused primarily on a value-based philosophy of business first and technology second. We're the leading AWS consulting partner in the region. We're headquartered here in Omaha, but cover the Midwest. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We have 27 accreditations and 13 AWS certifications throughout our delivery staff, as well as our sales staff as well. We were founded 20 years ago, as I said, headquartered here in Omaha. And really, we try to drive long-term relationships with our customers, producing superior results and pushing towards innovative solutions. Jellicose is also one of the only service providers in the region with third-party PCI certification in both infrastructure and application development. And Jellicose was honored in Inc. magazine as one of the fastest growing private companies in the US. Next slide. So geographically, as I mentioned, we are based in Omaha, Nebraska as our corporate office. We also have 2 locations in addition to our corporate office, one in Kansas City and one in St. Louis. We're looking to open another office in Des Moines. And again, the vast majority of our customers are in the central part of the US, but we do have customers all over the United States. In terms of where we focus from an industry perspective, sorry, can you go back real quick? Where we focus from an industry perspective is we focus primarily around financial services, again, with our PCI compliance. That's definitely important. Healthcare, around HIPAA compliance. But we also focus on manufacturing, distribution, transportation, consumer goods, media, and then technology, and really work with customers from early stage, well-funded startups all the way up to enterprise customers. Next slide. Just real quickly, as we're getting into some of these discussions around optimization and licensing assessments, Windows licensing on AWS is really important to consider when thinking about the value of this service offering. So what are some of the important considerations to put to mind? You got to think about software assurance, and that's typically purchased from Microsoft and includes license mobility. And license mobility gives customers the benefit to bring their own SQL licenses to whatever private cloud they choose to use, or sorry, public cloud they decide to use. So in this case, you can bring your own, you can BYOL your own Microsoft products, but they are subject to product terms. And you need to make sure you have software assurance and license mobility to be able to bring your own licenses. Or AWS offers licenses that are included in their EC2 instances as an example. So you can purchase and use AWS instances with licensing provided. So in some cases, our customers will bring their own licenses because it's more cost effective, and they might have the right agreement with Microsoft, and it's more cost effective. In other ways, customers are trying to reduce their Microsoft spend. So they're trying to cut down the money they spend with Microsoft, and they buy the licenses that are already included in the AWS instances. Next slide. So again, the key takeaway here is that the licenses you own will impact what and how you deploy in AWS. And I'll give you a quick example in the next slide. So in particular cases, we've modeled out kind of a monthly on-demand cost, and on-demand is kind of the street price from AWS of one C5 extra large EC2 instance in the US East region. For those of you that are new to AWS, EC2 as an example comes in t-shirt sizes, small, medium, and large, based on the capacity and the performance that customers need. And then the regions are basically full of availability zones, so you can have high availability in those areas. But in this case, if you look at Windows Server plus SQL Server Enterprise, if you purchased everything through AWS, including the licensing, so it'd be SQL Server Enterprise Edition, it's $1,357 a month. If you purchased Windows Server plus SQL Server Standard, as an example, it'd be $610 a month. But if customers were able to bring their own licenses via the right licensing vehicle through Microsoft, that EC2 instance would only be $259 a month. So again, licensing costs, and really some of one of the major values that David will talk about later is the ability to kind of build that future state architecture, leveraging the licensing vehicles customers currently have, because it's such a significant part of the overall total cost of ownership in AWS. So advantages of the optimization and licensing assessment, and I'll talk a little bit more about the framework here, but the framework itself does include the tooling, so Cloudamize, and expert guidance to migrate Windows workloads. Jellicose, as an AWS partner, has our Windows competency, so our staff is highly equipped to move Microsoft Windows to AWS. There's no cost to create the OLA output, and no obligation after the OLA is complete. Clearly, we're biased because we do these all the time, that there's a very clear cost benefit for our customers when they look at the results coming out of these out of the tool and the conversations that we have. The final product is a cost modeling and instance recommendations for Windows workloads. So we'll actually build a TCO and show if the customer moved their workloads from on-prem or co-location into AWS, this is what the architecture would look like. We always deliver these in conjunction with our AWS partners. So we work with local AWS specialists in these areas. And the average delivery cycle from beginning to end is 6 to 8 weeks. And the reason that's important is we like to let Cloudamize run for a certain period of time so we can capture as much information as possible. All right, so here's kind of the Jellicose OLA framework. The assess piece is the one we just talked about, which is leveraging Cloudamize. So we'll do the Cloudamize deployment. We'll let it run for a while, and then we'll build the TCO recommendations, a TCO report that shows our customers kind of the recommendations and the business case for moving workloads to AWS. Again, there's no obligation once that assessment's been completed. Customers can use that and can review that and use that later, or they can decide to do something as soon as possible. Once customers have made the decision to move forward into the achieve experience and operational readiness phase, we will also do some additional discovery and planning. We will do what we call a Jumpstart, which is the AWS landing zone deployment as part of this engagement. We'll start to build out a very detailed migration readiness planning activity. So we'll plan out future state migrations. And in this phase, we'll also do 2 to 5 lift and shift workloads that we'll have identified through the Cloudamize tool. AWS has invested a significant amount of money in this phase of the OLA framework, as has Jelecos. And in these cases, based on the size and complexity of the customer's environment, we can get funded up to $65,000 for customers to deploy this piece. So again, it's the Jumpstart, the landing zone, the Jellicose game plan, which is the migration readiness planning activities, and completion of 2 to 5 workloads. The list price for that is $25,000, which the customers would pay for. again, with the significant portion of that being funded by AWS and Jelecos. But what it's done for our customers is given them a very detailed migration roadmap and shown the business and the executive team the benefits of 2 to 5 lift and shift workloads. So moving those workloads from on-prem or co-location facilities into AWS. Once that's done, we've also seen customers then take that migration planning activity and move pretty quickly into future state wave execution. So we'll plan these out in waves. It needs to be done in a very judicious manner, but we'll start to do that over time. And again, customers start to see much more of the cost benefit analysis and the production and performance that they need going forward in a public cloud environment. Next. So all of what we've talked about early stage in that initial piece of the OLA framework is game plan and Jumpstart, which I'll talk a little bit more detailed about here shortly. But once you get into future state migration planning and execution around those waves, we call that migration factory. And that's a customized migration team that is focused on planning, utilizing our certified people and expert guidance to actually do the migrations and work with our customers. And then once those migrations have been completed, we have a service called Cloudamize, which is ongoing management of the customer's cloud infrastructure so that customers can focus on their applications, but also on their business. And so our team typically gets called on to provide daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly management of the AWS environment, as well as cost and technical optimization that ultimately helps our customers manage their AWS spend over a long period of time. In addition to that, we also have cloud enablement programs for our customers that include, setting up a cloud center of excellence, AWS training, CI/CD consulting. We are an AWS well-architected review partner, so we do that as part of our normal process. And then there are so many other features that we can provide. But in theory, from beginning to end during a customer's cloud journey, we follow kind of the 4-step process of game plan, Jumpstart, migration factory, and then Cloudamize. Next. I'll go through this real quick, but our AWS, our Jellicose Jumpstart again is our landing zone deployment, and that's built on the foundation of AWS Control Tower. If you know that, that's a very solid foundation to build this landing zone on. We provision the customer's AWS accounts as part of this engagement. We design and implement the AWS account structure, so setting up billing accounts and security and audit accounts and shared service accounts. And we design and implement the AWS security, which is hugely important to be able to kind of harden the security around the AWS environments. And then we provision and configure the network environment, which is really important as well. So we want to make sure that we're setting up the shared services account, we're configuring the VPC endpoints, and then modifying and managing the security groups. Jumpstart, much like AWS, is AWS's t-shirt sizes, comes with t-shirt sizes as well in small, medium, and large. And as you can see by the chart, the larger the t-shirt size, the more that the Jumpstart and more complex the Jumpstart becomes. Again, when we're looking at smaller companies all the way up through enterprise companies, each organization may need a different t-shirt size, so our Jumpstarts are set up accordingly. And again, the objective is to set up a very beginning step of establishing best practices within customers' AWS environments to allow them to scale and do it in a very secure way. Game plan, as I've mentioned, is the playbook for the cloud strategy going forward. A lot of times our customers will talk to us and say, look, we know we want to get to the cloud, but we're not really sure how to get there, and game plan is a great way to do that. We build our cloud vision. We make sure that the customer's cultural environment is ready for a cloud adoption. We help to build the overall corporate cloud business case. Again, we set up a cloud center of excellence, which is a best practice. We establish a training curriculum. So as part of the cultural organizational change management. We want to make sure that the customer's employees have a training plan in place so that they're comfortable with their new AWS environment as they go forward. And then we build the detailed cloud roadmap that includes that migration planning activity we talked about in the OLA framework. Strategy development is, again, hugely important from an executive buy-in perspective. So we want to make sure that we establish the cloud vision of where does the company want to go and what are some of the key business drivers for a cloud adoption, and clearly identify the vision statement and goals. Again, cloud readiness is super important from a cultural perspective, making sure that the applications, the data, the technology and skill sets, as well as the security considerations have been identified, and we can identify any remediation gaps that we might have. We've talked about the cloud business case and the roadmap. And as I said earlier, the Cloud Center of Excellence is an absolute best practice where you want to have a group of people identified to drive the Cloud Center of Excellence to make future state cloud recommendations from a business perspective. The migration factory we talked about as well. That also comes in a small, medium, and large package based on the size and complexity of the organization we're working with. But in theory, these 6 steps are crucial to the successful deployment of our migration factory. So we do analysis up front. We do a lot of migration planning up front so that we're working with the different IT organizations, making sure that everyone's ready for migrations, whether that be lift and shift, whether that be replatforming. We want to make sure that we're following kind of the best practices assigned with that. And then we get into the design and build migration factory. So we actually will do the migrations. Before it goes into production, we'll move those workloads into the test factory. And then we've got deployment factory, which is going into production. And then we do a lot of reporting once that's done. Cloud stages of adoption are also extremely important to follow from a cloud journey perspective. So a lot of times, if you look at the axes on the right there, value and time, we want to make sure that we're increasing the value to the organization as quickly as possible. Yet we want to make sure that we're doing it in a very foundational way. So, in addition to, identifying projects, foundational aspects of building a landing zone and a cloud center of excellence, we want to get all that done up front, because clearly customers that do that up front are going to be a lot more successful as they move forward. You can see on the bottom axis that the Cloud Center of Excellence gets deployed early and is involved throughout the retirement of tech debt all the way up into reinvention. But then we also use the Cloud Adoption Framework delivery toolkits that AWS provides to partners like us to help move those things faster, as fast as possible. Once you get up into migration, then you can start to kind of see what that looks like from a cost perspective, and further adoption and scale across a growing portion of the IT portfolio, which is great, because then when you get to the reinvention part, the operations are in the cloud. You can start focusing on taking advantage of AWS's flexibility and capabilities to transform business for the organization. So that is it from my side. I will wrap it up here and hand it over to David Burbank from Cloudamize. David is a channel executive. He's been with Cloudamize for over 2 years. He also has his AWS Cloud Practitioner certification, and he lives in Philly. So David, thanks for your time, and I'll turn things over to you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much, Kyle. Can you just confirm that we can see my screen here?
Got it.
Okay, great. Well, as Kyle mentioned, I am David Burbank. I am an account manager here at Cloudamize. So I work with partners and customers mainly out of North America. For today's purposes, we're going to go through a short deck, and if there is time, we'll go through our software in a live walkthrough. All I ask is that If there are any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to put them in chat or stop me at any given time here. So to get started, let's talk about what Cloudamize is. And what Cloudamize is a cloud computing analytics platform that provides high precision analytics and powerful automation to improve the speed, ease, and accuracy of migrating to the cloud. And we do that in a number of different ways, but the main concept is that we are a software that collects data on your infrastructure and then maps that infrastructure out to AWS to tell you what cost would look like, what performance would look like, and what the best instances to migrate into AWS would look like. So one of the programs that we deal with on a day-to-day basis and is very successful is the AWS OLA program. And what's included in this program is AWS funding Cloudamize and Jellicose for 60 days of Cloudamize licensing, for Jellicose and Cloudamize to put together an OLA presentation, which we'll cover in a couple of slides here, as well as a dedicated resource that will support your organization to set up that data collection on your infrastructure. And during that 60-day time frame, you'll be able to leverage the Cloudamize software. You'll be able to leverage Jellicose kind of expertise to take a look at our data and understand the data outputs from our software. So with that, I just want to discuss kind of a few projects or the types of customers that we work with. So we work with every industry, we work with every vertical, we work with every size of customer. So whether it's SMB or a Fortune 500 organization, Cloudamize is going to be working with these types of organizations through the OLA program. And what the OLA presentation will look like for your organization is really going to differ on, what your infrastructure looks like, the size, how many Windows-based workloads that you have. But at a high level, what it's going to provide, and again, this is put together between Cloudamize and the Jellicose team, is an executive summary that details how long we collected data for, what our target scope for data collection was, what type of environment we were looking at, be it production, non-prod, test, dev, specific data centers, and what kind of approach we took to collect that data. Was it an agent-based approach? Was it agentless? And again, how long did we run that for? And what this is going to provide is a TCO analysis of what would your infrastructure look like in AWS? What would it look like from a compute perspective, a storage perspective, a network perspective? From a licensing perspective, what would Microsoft operating systems and SQL, Microsoft SQL look like? All of that data will be captured by Cloudamize, formulated by Jelecos, and presented to your teams. And then we'll get into a little bit more granular level details around performance to tell you exactly what your existing performance looks like, what resource utilization data looks like for CPU, memory, disk I/O, storage, and what that would look like if it were to be migrated into an optimized AWS infrastructure. So we'll be able to kind of convert your existing state and show you exactly what AWS performance would look like. And we do that for compute, storage, network, as well as SQL optimization. So we can take a look at the existing state of your Microsoft SQL licensing, show you if you're over provisioned, under provisioned, and what optimization would look like if you were to migrate, again, those Microsoft SQL servers to AWS. And we can even showcase with Jelicose's help, things like software assurance, bring your own licensing, and again, optimization for that licensing. So I'll stop for just a second, see if there's any questions or comments either from any attendees or from the Jellicose side.
It doesn't look like we have any questions posted, David. I think we're good.
All right, no worries at all. So from a sample presentation perspective, what you could expect are a number of different pricing plans. So that could be things like reserved instances, upfront payments, different SQL licensing configurations for BYOL or software assurance. And again, this presentation will be formulated at no cost for your teams, presented via a WebEx or Zoom session similar to this, and then made available via static download for your team's post OLA engagement. So one of the other kind of components to the OLA engagements that's really interesting is that you don't just get that static report and you don't just get that presentation. You also get access to the Cloudamize software for the duration of your AWS funded engagement. And what the Cloudamize platform includes is things like TCO analysis. So looking at in-depth performance analysis during that data collection. So you'll actually have a time series view into things like CPU, disk IO, network, and all kinds of different resource utilization metrics. So you could see a particular, high recommendation in AWS, or, kind of high existing utilization on-prem. And if you were scratching your head and you said, I wonder what that is, or why that's occurring, you can drill down into the data with the help of Jellicose to say, this is exactly the time of day that this peak happened. And then we can take a look at your application interdependency mapping and tell you all of the different applications that are living and communicating during that data collection period. So Cloudamize is very much going to be the software component of these engagements. We provide really, really interesting and really, really useful quantitative data. But it's very important to note that there is a qualitative level of expertise and cloud knowledge that does need to be applied to our data. And that's why we partner with fantastic partners like Jelecos. And that kind of comes into play for the other modules and capabilities that our software does have, because you can create custom AWS scenarios based off of SQL licensing, different regions. If you have EDP, specific discounts can be applied. And there's the ability to toggle things like your CPU thresholds, your storage capacities, whether or not disks should be rated together or not. And most customers, aren't necessarily fully familiar with these topics and with these scenarios, whereas Jellicose, works day in and day out in this particular area. The last module that your teams would have access to during the duration of the OLA engagement is what's called our migration planner. And I do believe we'll have some time to walk through this today. But in this module, we will see every single machine that was part of data collection. We'll see every single application and application version of observed installed applications on those machines. We'll be able to see the interdependencies of applications that actually ran during that data collection period. We'll be able to tell you which ports applications communicated on via firewall rules reporting. And the whole idea is that with this dynamic module, Jellicose has the ability to take a look at this information and tie it into their specific offerings to do things like build migration move groups by specific applications or operating systems or infrastructure types. And they can do this more efficiently and de-risk migration waves via the application interdependency mapping, the integration with Cloud Indoor, and the ability for Cloudamize to showcase not just machines that were in scope of data collection, but also communications to machines that were not in scope of communication. So if there is potentially some shadow IT or just machines that were missed from the initial data collection, we'll be able to showcase dependencies outside of scope and give you the specific IP address and port of communication for those particular dependencies. So to wrap up the presentation, I don't want to go too deep into it, but at a high level, Cloudamize has two different data collection options. That would be agent-based and agentless. There is the requirement to set up data collection. All of the fantastic data that we do aggregate must be collected somehow, some way, and the two options are agent or agentless. So it's as easy as putting a lightweight agent on your servers via whatever your existing software deployment method may be. So that's SCCM, Puppet or Bash scripts, Windows System Center, GPO. No reboots are required. We collect absolutely no PII or PCI based data. Our data is encrypted both at rest and in flight, and is shipped to the Cloudamize servers for aggregation and then processing. The advantages of the agent is that it does usually take less time to set up. It collects data every 30 seconds, and it does collect more details around Microsoft SQL than the agentless approach. The advantage of the agentless approach is that you don't have any software on your servers, but you would need to open up high range ports RPC. But with the agentless approach, it's used in about 40% of our engagements. So it is a fantastic alternative if agent-based isn't able to be approved. And the data follows a similar path to the Cloudamize servers. It's all encrypted both at rest and flight, and again, is used in plenty of our engagements. So with that, I'm gonna kind of conclude the presentation section of this. And I know we have some time to go through the software and a live demo, if that makes sense. But are there any questions or anything like that at this point?
Take a quick look. Nope, looks like we are clear. No questions on the Q&A or the chat.
All right, and are we still good on time to go through just a short demo?
We are, yep, thanks, Dave.
Okay, great. And did that pop up for you?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, great. Well, what we are looking at now is the actual Cloudamize software. And to be transparent, it is a little bit complex. There are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of buttons and different places where data resides and lots of different data points. So that is why we lean on and rely on experts like Jellicose to be involved with engagements utilizing Cloudamize, because they are experts on the software. They know where everything is, and they can help formulate the data that exists in our platform for outcomes for their customers. So just for kind of a high level overview of what we're looking at, where things are, and then how to kind of interpret this data, what happens is data collection is set up. So that would be between Jelecos, Cloudamize, and your team, or whoever manages your infrastructure, to set up either agent or agentless data collection. That data collection is run anywhere between 14 to 30 days. And then that data is aggregated and processed by Cloudamize and made available via our SaaS application, which is what we're looking at now. And this data isn't meant to be kind of just static and consumed exactly how it is. There is the ability to create different scenarios, update what we're looking at, and ultimately plan scenarios where we can migrate our workloads to AWS. So on the top left here, what we see is workload on demand. Think of this as factory settings. It's not optimized by any stretch of the imagination. We also have hardware on demand, which is taking a look at the existing hardware as it's provisioned today in the data collection state, or whatever infrastructure had data collection set up on it. And we are not looking at resource utilization data. We're only looking at the specs of the hardware. And we're saying what hardware exists in AWS that is most similar to what we collected data on. So this would be kind of a like for like migration to AWS. The workload on demand is just kind of a like meh, middle of the road, somewhat optimized look at what a migration to AWS would look like. And then there's the ability to create custom designs and custom cloud scenarios, which Jellicose can do, which will show you a much more optimized, much more realistic look of what AWS would look like, because the cloud does have some complexities to it. But if you understand what those complexities are, you can kind of demystify it, simplify things, and showcase more realistic type recommendations, costing and pricing. And how Cloudamize does this is for each machine that is in scope of data collection, we take a look at critical resource utilization metrics. So things like compute, CPU, memory, disk, network IO, etc. And we collect them during that period of data collection. And what we'll do for each and every machine that's in scope is recommend a particular AWS instance, and we'll tell you why we are recommending it. So it's not just, hey, take our word for it. This is your instance, go run and migrate there. It'll be, we're recommending a C5 large for machine 10, or whatever the machine may be, based off of what we observed for CPU and memory. And the bottleneck just refers to the why we're recommending. So as we scroll through, we can tell you the number of cores that were observed during data collection, how many cores would be recommended in AWS, what the existing CPU utilization looks like, what the predicted AWS peak CPU utilization would look like, what is the current provisioned memory, what is the utilized memory, and what memory requirements would there be in AWS. So we're looking at all of these different parameters for every single instance, and then computing which instance would be best suited for that particular machine based off of getting the lowest possible cost with the best possible performance, and performance that is agreeable as a customer. And if we ever really wanted to spot check this, we could drill down into any of our particular machines and look at that time series data. So what was our CPU utilization or memory or disk IO during that data collection period? What were the peaks and troughs? And if we went with a particular AWS instance, in this case, a C5 large, what would that performance look like? So in this particular example, we can say, well, you know what, CPU, we really will not have to worry about for this particular instance. Looks like the performance will absolutely be there within AWS. The one thing that, you know, can be taken into account then is, well, you know, what if we went with a machine that maybe had a little bit less CPU, because we could kind of afford for the CPU to be much higher. In this particular case, since memory is a bottleneck, it wouldn't matter. We would still need to go with the C5 large. And it's not expected that a customer is really going to know all of these details and how to work through this and how to interpret this data. But again, that's what Jellicose is here for, is they are the qualitative expertise in the cloud who know how to interpret this data, make sense of it, and provide recommendations, and ultimately hit on deliverables with the data. So we do the same thing with storage. With network, the calculations are a little bit different, but Jellicose does need to operate within our network parameters. For licensing, we do take a look at licensing costs from Microsoft SQL, costs for compute or for the operating systems for Microsoft are built into the compute costs natively. And what we have the option to do is create custom designs based off of what we're trying to accomplish or what we're trying to take a look at. So this is something that Jelecos and Cloudamize would do before the OLA presentation. So a lot of this work's going to be taken care of before that presentation. But if your teams ever did want to join in or create a different scenario, there's the ability to come in, create a design, and start looking at all of these different custom parameters. And that will take a second to load because it is going to ingest a lot of data at the tail end of this. But what they're going to be are pricing plans, which specific regions in AWS you want to map to, things like bring your own licensing, software assurance, and then different performance thresholds. So while that's loading, any questions or comments or things from Jellicos or any attendees?
I don't see any questions, but I think, back to your point, the ability to provide this data to our customers' executive teams is super powerful, so that people can truly understand that not only the cost benefit, but how the overall future state architecture will be laid out. So I think this tool in particular, based on our experience, has been a huge upside from a business case development perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that, Kyle. And in the meantime there, our designer did load up. So on the right-hand side, you'll see things like the ability to look at dedicated instances, dedicated hosts for Microsoft SQL, license mobility, whether or not we're going to optimize based off of the number of cores, specific pricing plan options. So I think, a couple of years ago, we calculated that there's over 25 million different configurations in here. So there are a lot of different ways to customize based off of this information. And that's, again, where Jellicose can come in and say, all right, what are we looking to accomplish? What applications are we focusing on? What are your business outcomes? What are you trying to really get or solve by moving to the cloud, whether that's just lower cost or increased agility? All of that different logic can be applied in the Cloudamize engine from just a purely IT perspective and recommendations from an IaaS-based perspective. But in the designer, we can tweak the different considerations to provide a much more optimized view of what would AWS be for you as a customer. So that's something Jellicose would build. After building it, that design would, again, populate here. And again, the cost would be much more customized and suited to your particular environment. So with about 15 minutes left here, I want to spend about 10 minutes on the migration planner. And this is where all of the application interdependency data will reside. So for every machine that's in scope of data collection, it will show up as a green machine that can be kind of pre-grouped or pre-categorized by Cloudamize, as we have a library of over 25,000 applications. So if we see SharePoint or Apache or SolarWinds or SQL, we have different prioritization metrics, and we will group those automatically. And you can either kind of accept those groupings, or we could ingest an existing CSV for how you as a customer would like to group these machines together. But the whole point of this migration planner is to do just that. Plan a migration based off of application interdependencies and other relevant data. So for a quick example, we could just take a look at this SharePoint machine on the SharePoint server, and we could take a look on the right-hand side of every single application that we observed communicating during that data collection. And if we really wanted to be kind of holistic, we could do select all, and we'd be looking at every single process that was observed from a client-server relationship during that data collection period. If we wanted to be more focused and target specific applications that were targeting for migration, we could take a look at maybe our web apps and our SharePoint interdependencies. And by selecting on those three, we see those specific communications. And if I open them up, we can see server-to-server communication. We can drill down into that dependency, and we can see the client-side relationship as well as the server-side relationship for all of our app interdependencies. So in this case, we're just looking at SharePoint chatting with Kerbos from a client to server based perspective. If we wanted to investigate this group further, we actually see SQL. So if we wanted to look at database interconnectivities for, let's just say, Microsoft SQL or MySQL. We can take a look at all of those interdependencies. And one of the call outs that we can kind of make is, well, there is a decent bit of interdependencies to this shadow IT group. And these just represent machines that were not in scope of data collection. So if we were to pop this up, what Jellicose is going to ask is, they might say, hey, client X, Y, and Z, we're looking through the data right now, and we actually see some, relatively important dependencies running from our SQL servers, and the client-side process is, this Java process or application. And we see it's communicating on port 37892, and it's communicating to this IP address 250.140. What is this server? Do we need to, potentially rerun a data collection and include this machine? Is it, a network device? Is it, a Unix box? This again kind of comes back to, there's a need for qualitative expertise here. It's not just, run any tool in the market and get kind of a roadmap to, cost and what it would look like to migrate to the cloud. You would need a little bit of support from an organization that can say, yep, yeah, interesting data. Here's what we're seeing. Based off of this, we have a few questions. And then based off of your answers, we're going to have a couple of recommendations. So in this case, it might be, that actually is a critical dependency. We know that is just a machine that we forgot that hosts our, front-end PHP or back-end PHP servers, whatever it may be. What they might now do is say, let's start to create migration waves. Let's start to prioritize particular applications or infrastructure for migration based off of, what business outcomes we're looking to accomplish. So in this case, if we were just targeting SQL, we might create a group based off of wave one being SQL Server. We're going to include all of the dependencies that we outlined, as we could note, whether they're critical or not. And we're going to move all of this into a migration wave. And what we can now guarantee is that during that data collection period, there were no interdependencies for MySQL or SQL Server. In this particular example, it kind of differs depending on what you're targeting. But none of those dependencies run outside of this group. So it's, again, a more efficient, safer way to plan migrations. It's certainly still, a complex thing, but organizations like Jelecos can really hit on and leverage this tool to do this more efficiently. So with a couple minutes here, just want to cover some quick things. You will be able to take a look at all of your SQL databases, and that's specific to Microsoft SQL databases, and see their sizes, names, clustering, addition of licensing. You're going to be able to get reports of all of your firewall rules, inbound, outbound, and UDP. We, again, will be able to export and take a look in the SaaS platform of all of your installed applications, the version of those applications, the machines that they're installed on. We can even identify whether or not particular processes are hard-coded or not. So we'll be able to say, X, Y, and Z application or process is believed to be hard-coded based off of what we observed during data collection. And you'll be able to even get a report of every single application interdependency from a client server perspective during that data collection period. So we can say, in CSV format, here's every single communication that was observed during data collection from a client-side process to server-side processes, the machines they were connected to or dependent upon. And if they weren't in scope of data collection, we'll even give you that IP address and that port of communication. So tons and tons of data, lots of power in this, but 90+% of our engagements are through partners. So there's going to be a lot of stuff and a lot of data here and a lot of capabilities, and you usually would prefer to have some assistance on this. And what AWS does, again, is funds 60 days worth of Cloudamize licensing. So everything that I've shown so far is absolutely at no cost to start. for 60 days. And some customers do, decide to move to a paid engagement past that, but it's absolutely not a prerequisite. Definitely isn't something we push hard onto our customers, or, kind of go back and forth and try and set our agenda to. We really love the OLA program. The AWS teams are great. Jellicose is great. So we recommend everyone who is interested in just, hey, what would AWS look like for us, to engage in one of these OLA engagements with Jelecos. So I'll leave it at that. If there's any other questions, feel free to let me know, or, catch me on LinkedIn, or I can share my email address after this. Thanks.
Thanks, David. We did have one quick question. Just based on your experience, is there are you able to show cost savings from on-prem and colo to AWS every time, or is it just truly based on the customer's environment?
Truly based off of the customer's environment. Cover years AWS, but there have been a few examples where, some specific workloads were better suited just based off of, interesting, I guess I'll say, resource utilization patterns, where it was, hey, it actually would, for this particular server, be more expensive on AWS for X, Y, and Z reason. Usually with the data that we have, it's pretty explainable. And there are alternatives in AWS that are a better fit, and a better kind of economical and performance-based option for that workload. But there are going to be, some cases where that extra look by AWS or a partner like Jellicose are required. And we're completely agnostic. We're not owned by AWS. AWS is a customer, but they are not the ones to feed us what the pricing or recommendations are. That's pulled directly via API. So it is very third-party oriented, very agnostic, and will be suited customer to customer. And the last note I'll make on that is that while we do provide AWS costs, and while we do, a very good job at projecting and predicting those costs, we do not make the assumption of knowing what your existing billing is, what your existing, hardware or manpower or whatever those existing costs you may have. So that's where you would want to engage with Jellicose, and they can kind of help build that cloud economic or that ROI or TCO based reporting, versus what you have, because Cloudamize is only going to focus on the AWS costing portion.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's an absolutely true statement. Then, that customers utilizing this OLA framework are getting a true representation of what can and what should move to AWS versus what could or should stay on-prem, just based on the workload. So it definitely is a true representation of kind of best practices, migration recommendations.
100%.
Okay, great. All right, well, we're getting to the top of the hour. We realize that during our uncertain times of COVID, we've got quite a bit of webinar fatigue. So we appreciate everybody hanging on through the almost hour here. David, I appreciate your time and your insight into Cloudamize. It's extremely beneficial from a tool perspective. And from the overall OLA framework perspective, it's absolutely vital to help us build a TCO and recommendation for customers as they start their cloud journey. So thank you, David. We appreciate everyone taking the time out of their schedule to join the webinar today. And just a final note, we will be sending out the presentation so that everyone will have it. And clearly, if you do have any questions or there are any things that we can do to help assist, we would love to hear from you. Thanks again for your time, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.